And I could feel her saying, and I knew what she was saying, because she was saying to me, I'm okay, you're okay, we're going to be okay. And that was the first time that I said to myself, there is another side. Like it's definitely there. So the first big spiritually transformative experience, if we, aside from Patrice's passing, was I had a visitation. And a visitation is a dream where somebody, the spirit that you're talking with, that often it's a relative, an ancestor, a family member. And the connection is so real that you know that this is not a regular dream.
I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of The Soul Inspired. Today we have Bernadette Thompson with us. She has had a spiritual awakening throughout her life with multiple spiritual experiences. We're going to talk to her about that. She's also an intuitive healer. Thank you so much, Bernadette, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. I'm excited to be here.
What I usually start with is I look at, you look at your life and where you're at now, and I'm always curious of influence. So I'm always curious of if who you are now is who you were as a child, and I go back to the child, childhood of Bernadette, and say, were you the same type of person? Could you give us a little detail on who you were as a child and the things you were into?
Hmm. That's fascinating. Totally up my alley. Um, yeah, when I look back, I think of myself as a spiritual being now. And but when I look back, I can see sparks of that. I can see I was from big family, big Irish Catholic family, and I was one of the babies. So I had seven brothers and sisters, and I was one of the little ones. Yeah, and
Wow.
um, so it as a I was always caring. I was always wanting to care for people, and that was kind of my what I always wanted to do. I was always the good one, the one they didn't have to worry about
Yeah, right.
out of all those kids. And but it's funny because when you are the good one, there's a lot of people are like they don't want to hang out with the good one. They want to hang
Mm,
out with. So as I was growing up, uh, I tried to change that a little because, I
mhm.
was really not cool and I was trying to get a little cooler.
Yeah.
And there were people that, I grew up and when it was the beginning where people were starting to like smoke weed or do something like that. And I was way afraid of any of that. So my thing was, okay, I'll smoke a cigarette, which was,
Right.
and so that kind of gives you, I don't even know why I brought that up, but it gives you kind of a funny look back at yeah, I was just somebody. I was always been a rule follower and
Yeah.
and just very caring, and that part grew into who I am today. It has morphed when I share about my spiritual experience and what brought it on. It's changed me, but when I look back now and I see those times where spirituality was uh, a part of me. Not so much, I grew up Catholic, so we were like the front row at the church, the whole all eight of us kind of. But I didn't grow up. When I got older, I was allowed to just kind of choose, and so I kind of took what I liked and left the rest as far as
Yeah.
the church is concerned.
Yeah, no, I love it. And when you said that, you don't know why you shared about the smoking and things like that, because you said you were a rule follower. I was very much the same. I was always the kind one, the nice one. But then I did get down some heavier roads, just also through life experiences, kind of, made me try different things. But I always wanted to follow the rules. And if I went against the rules, I felt bad. But I rebelled a bit. And it sounds like you had a rebellious moment, and that's why you
It was
probably
pretty
shared.
mild, but
It,
yes.
it was wild, but it was your version of rebelling
Exactly.
against your own natural intuition and intention, right, of who you were.
Yeah.
So you were
Yeah.
this person who really felt that even as a child, and this was before any spiritual type of events or awakening or transformation. So we're leading into, so usually I try to dig in then and see where things change. So I'm assuming you went into your 20s and probably started life naturally like most people. Maybe you were with someone, maybe you started a family. I'm not sure what your life experience was, but I was wondering if you could kind of dig into, maybe if you look at when the transformation happened or when things started to shift for you and give us a little like introduction into who you were at that time and what was happening up until that moment.
So if we take it from a spiritual point of view, I actually went to Catholic school from kindergarten through college, which is kind of amazing. But it was back at a time where, when you were in college, it was not very, it was very loose. It wasn't a very strict, it wasn't anything like that. But so that spirituality, that's where it started to change, where it went from being this old, fashion where it was kind of more about music and things like that, as far as keeping any kind of spiritualness. But then I went into this little mode of what a lot of people do, finding a job, graduated from college for a job. I was late. I mean, I had relationships, but I was late to finding my life partner. I didn't get married until I was 29, and which was late for the time when I was growing up. So I went into having just getting married and starting to raise kids. I have three children, and so as I kind of I did that really quickly, just talking about that, but it was really normal. It was really normal, except that I started where my spiritual thoughts started happening was when I was kind of leaving the church, so to speak, behind and just taking some of the spiritualness from it. And I remember and this was probably a little bit earlier, when I started realizing that everything, it seemed to be, that was all the rules seemed to be made by man and not by God, so to speak. And I remember thinking about the Pope, and that the Pope was supposed to be infallible. And that struck me as, the Pope's infallible? Like, so does that mean, when I realized that, and I was probably I was a teenager at this point, but I was thinking, so if he likes vanilla ice cream and I like chocolate ice cream, I'm supposed to like vanilla ice cream, that, because
Right.
I didn't understand what that concept was. And that sent me into I started reading books like The Birth of Christianity. How did this all happen? What is this spiritualness all about? Yet all the while, I'm still just being a regular, working, being a mom, doing the regular things in my life. Um, and and then I did have an experience that began the change.
Okay.
And is it okay if I share that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you had an experience, so while your
Yeah,
curiosity was starting to go and you were looking into why, your faith, why it was the way it was, how it started, things like that. And
right.
it led you into an experience. Yeah, absolutely. If you want to share what happened.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about it is um, so I was kind of interested in all these things, also very interested in ancient civilizations. For some reason, that's always been a calling for me as well. But I had an unexpected loss. I had a friend, a dear friend. Our children were the same age. We were preschool moms together. And she had two children. I had two, or I think I had three at the time, or whatever. But she went to sleep one night and didn't wake up. She passed away.
Wow.
And it was sudden, and not expected at all. And she left these two little children. And when they went looking, when the autopsy, they went looking to see what happened, they really couldn't find a reason. But the incredible part about it is that she had shared with me, her daughter was 7 years old when her oldest was 7 years old. And when she shared with me, her mom passed away when she was 7 years old. And she had always worried about that. And her mom passed away from a very similar circumstance. So I
Wow.
knew all this information. And so when this happened, it blew me away. I was just, and went into this deep grief, um, just like chaos, not chaos, but just like wandering, not really understand, just walking around, not really knowing what to think or do. And she came to me. So it was about 2 weeks after she passed away, and I was deep in grief. And my daughter, who's in first grade at the time, came to me like the bus is coming at 8:05 and it's 8 o'clock, and she needs a picture of the whole family. And
Mhm.
so I'm like rushing through, going through, looking for pictures because she had to take it to school.
Right.
Um, so I'm looking and I can't find it and I can't find it. And all of a sudden, a picture of Patrice popped up from an old birthday party. And I didn't know I had that picture of her.
Mm.
And when that happened, her spirit came to me, like just went right through my body. And I could feel her saying, and I knew what she was saying, because she was saying to me, I'm okay. You're okay. We're going to be okay. And that was the first time that I said to myself, there is another side. Like it's definitely there. Even
Yeah.
though I had lost, grandparents, my parents were still alive, but I'd lost grandparents and great aunts and uncles and things like that. But that was the moment that I was no longer afraid of dying because Patrice was over there.
Hmm.
So it was,
Wow.
um, and it's so funny. I've done a few podcasts, and I don't often go back to that story because I don't often go back to my childhood. So
Hmm.
taking me through, you just reminded me that really, those two things, those things of my curiosity and Patrice's passing were, set the stage for me to be more open spiritually.
So
And
yeah, it was a pivotal point in your
yeah,
life that kind of gave you the understanding that, oh, I've always, I know a lot of people have coined it the meat suit or this body or this
yeah,
incarnation, this thing we're doing, because sometimes we're so much on this hamster wheel of what we're doing, and it usually comes down to a trauma or a drama, whatever you want to call it. Something happens, and generally something comes in, and this trauma, it was, you lost this friend that passed, and you know unexpectedly she also came, like that wasn't you weren't trying to have any type of spiritual experience, it just happened. And those
mhm,
ones are really amazing because they catch you off guard, and generally, and it's the same sense with people with NDEs, right? They obviously aren't not they're not always expecting it, and then their entire beingness kind of shifts because, not to say they didn't believe something before, now they do, but it shifts everything, right? So that gave you this insight that we're much more than we are.
mhm.
And it may, I'm appreciative that you haven't, that I get to share this on Soul Inspired, that, you know, because that may have been kind of a triggering moment that kind of started to lead you in this direction, even though you probably had some life lessons coming and some things on the way. It gave you at least a little taste that there's something else happening.
Right.
And a lot of people don't tell people about those moments. They have them. They think, I'm not telling anybody because if I tell somebody that happened,
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
not they're gonna think, oh, you're really having a tough time. Something's really wrong.
yeah.
Did it feel, just before you tell us exactly what happened with the other experience, did that moment feel tangible and real? Like when she came through you?
Oh, absolutely.
So it wasn't
Absolutely.
like
I
dreamlike?
knew in an instant. Yeah, there
Mm,
was no question in my mind
wow.
that she came to me. No question at all. And, shared it with people. Yeah. I but I do think that uh, because of all of the spiritualness of growing up in the church,
Mhm.
even though I left that part, I think that I just had this sense of of what spirituality outside of the church could feel like. And so when that happened, I think it was almost a welcoming, but not, I mean, it brought me out of the grief. I was able to look at the grief differently, from that moment on. But yeah, it was pretty special, and it
Wow.
was, yeah, it was,
Well,
and she's still
yeah.
with me. I mean, Patrice has shown up in my life many times since that time.
Wow.
So yeah,
Yeah, that's amazing. And so it gave you this feeling of there's something else. And I can see why it would change your whole outlook on even death, right? Or people who lose people, because now how do you come back from that? How do you,
Yeah.
what does that mean for everyone? What does that mean for us? Those questions go on. I didn't have those experiences growing up. It was more of a seeking for me for a lot of years, and that's what got me interested in NDEs. But I have had some experiences throughout my life, so I can relate to the whole mystical side of
Yeah.
1 minute your life is just normal, as we
Yeah.
call it, and then it's like, okay, something happened.
Yeah.
And some people, funny enough, some people when they share this on the Soul Inspired, they will say, some will say, started wondering if I needed to get checked, like something maybe is wrong. But but then when the things continue, or there's other very strong energies they feel and those types of things, then they go, okay, there's something else going on. So you had that moment, and then you continued through your young adulthood, and you said you found the person to be with at around 29.
Yeah.
Were you, is this when the main experiences started to
No.
come online, or when did that happen?
So Patrice passed away. I mean, my spiritualness was certainly there, but I was too busy raising kids and doing that. And so it was much later, and it came when my husband came to me, and this really it's 10, 12 years ago that this big awakening happened for me. A little, well, I'll tell you a little bit of background after, but what brought it on was that David had come to me and shared with me that my husband, David, had come to me and shared with me that he was an alcoholic, and that it had, and we knew this his whole life. He came from an alcoholic family, and I came from a big Irish family, and so drinking was around for both of us. And we had always talked about it, that was a risk for his family, from his family.
Mhm.
And so he came to me to say that he couldn't handle it, he couldn't control it anymore. And I knew in that instant that our lives had changed. And he, it's easier to, it was 4.5 years of addiction and chaos and everything that happens when there's addiction in a family. And he passed away at the end of it. Um, so he died in 2017. And but my awakening came um, during when I was going through this, when as you just said before, that it's often trauma or grief or something, or that can often open up a spiritual, and that is definitely what had happened with me. So it's also related, going back to the Catholic. It's kind of funny, there's a relationship there. I need to share that I have my background is I have worked with kids who have had grief and trauma. I worked in a middle school on an alternative team, very trained in all of that. But I've done ancestry for years and years and years. And so um, I have done it for many people. It's been my sidekick that I had done. And so during all this time, I was using the ancestry to really, I don't know, take my mind off things, help me just kind of deal with everything that was going on. And David had a beautiful soul. We had a beautiful soul connection. Addiction is it's a progressive disease, and it's really hard. It's just a terrible disease. So I was doing a lot of ancestry, and I started saying the rosary, which I hadn't done in 100 years.
Mhm.
But because I had heard somebody talk about it, actually a medium had talked about it, that he used it before he would read a crowd. And it's a meditation. It, like many spiritual practices, they're beads. So there is this, it's a tactile, and there's like it's almost like saying a mantra, saying the rosary, you're saying it over and over. over and over again.
Mhm.
So I was doing this, and in order to keep myself from making a grocery list, I was imagining my ancestors sitting around a table with me, um, saying the rosary with me, just to keep my focus on, so that I could get into that meditative state. So the first big spiritually transformative experience, if we, aside from Patrice's passing, was I had a visitation. And a visitation is a dream where somebody, the spirit that you're talking with, that often it's a relative, an ancestor, a family member. And the connection is so real that you know that this is not a regular dream. And it was like a Zoom. It's always like you and me, and we were sitting across a table. It was my great aunt. Her name was Sister Lou. It was a golden room we were sitting in, and I didn't want to look at her. So I'm looking back and forth and looking around, and she grabbed my hands and she made me look right at her. And she said to me, "We hear your prayers." And I woke up.
Wow.
So in in that moment, I knew that they were with me, that they had been hearing my prayers, and that they knew what was happening in my life. They knew what was going on with David, and everything that was, all the difficulties that come along with addiction in a family. You tend to, when there is that, you tend to circle the wagons and just keep going in, thinking that we can do this ourselves, we can do this ourselves, and so there was a sense of relief that there was more than just me, that they were with me. So but there was another one that came very close by with that first experience, and this happened maybe a month later. Can't remember exactly, but again, I was saying the rosary, but I was awake. And when you say the rosary, for anybody that isn't familiar with it, you're supposed to say it in an audible voice, kind of, as I was saying before, it's kind of like saying a mantra, so that it helps you into that meditative state when you're saying it. So I was using it to go to sleep at night, just to kind of settle down. And my ancestral background is all Irish. And I started, I was saying the rosary, and all of a sudden, I felt this energy come in, and it was like a channeling. And I began to say the rosary in an Irish brogue. And I realized that I had an ancestor that was coming in to say the rosary with me. And I was by myself, so it was a shock.
Mhm.
But I knew the way it was coming through, and the cadence, and the way they were saying it, they were saying it with me. They were so, the way I was saying it completely changed the inflection on different words and things like that. And so I was shocked that this happened. But the next morning when I got up, I pulled up my ancestral tree, and I could feel the energy of who it was, and it was my great great grandmother on my mother's side. And I could feel, there are so many of them. I have a huge tree, and I actually thought it was somebody on my father's side because I'd been doing work on that side, but it was on my great great grandmother, um, who was on my mom's side. And she came back and said that rosary with me every time I said it for months and months. Every time, and um, even when, because I believe, there was part of me that didn't believe that she was channeling through me, and wanted to say that I was making it up and that I was uh, doing it. And so there were times, many times, that I would try not to say it in the Irish brogue, but
Mhm.
as soon as I settled down and got into it, it came right back in. So I just,
Wow.
yeah. So and that really, things have opened up way more now, but um, that's what was the equivalent of, I don't want to say the equivalent of my NDE because those are so instantaneous, but it was definitely spiritually transformative at the time. And David always said to me, yeah, I'm the only way I'm getting to heaven is on if you're letting me in, you're helping me in. So, so so I mean, I even shared it with him that this happened while he was still with us.
Wow. So
And they,
while you were struggling through that with him, or not struggling through, but you knew what was, he was struggling and
yeah,
you were going through this whole experience.
yeah. And so and they opened up, one of the things I do, not only I do ancestral healing, and I intuitively I do readings for people, especially bringing in their ancestors and loved ones who have recently crossed, and helping them understand the story of how they came to be, who they are. um, so that that was part of what I began to do after this all happened. And yeah, it's just, so that's kind of where everything changed. That's the pivotal moment. We were talking about it before a little bit, but that's the pivotal moment when my life changed, and I couldn't go back to, once you can't unknow it.
That's right. That's right. I want to say thank you so much for sharing that. And everyone's experiences from a spiritual place can be different, but you're right. You left that off very nicely. Where it's like, once you see something, you can't unsee it.
Yeah,
And, and I'm just going to say this, having a show like this, there is quite a bit of different experiences that come out in these episodes. And I also know of, some people, whether they leave comments or they're questioning, come on, like, this sounds kind of out there. And the thing is, they may have not seen anything. It's if you don't see it, you can't know it's there.
yeah,
And I've personally had one experience in my life that was a co-experience with someone where we both seen the same thing,
wow,
and it wasn't something you can really define or explain. Let's leave it there. I probably explained it at a different episode, but again, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So you can
yeah,
fight it, and you can
hmm,
try to reason with it, and you can try to come up with some kind of uh, reasoning from this realm,
yeah,
but or you can continue to work through it. And it sounds like you were working through it. Once you experienced it, you just kept digging deeper, it sounds like, because you got into
yeah,
the ancestry. You're like, this is different. This is out of something I haven't
yeah,
been doing.
yeah.
And it's a personal thing. You're having personal experiences. And I have a few questions around it, if you don't mind.
Sure, 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 sure.
I wanted to ask, you know, when you first got that first visitation from, I think you said it was your great aunt,
Yeah,
right away that tells me that, you were already going to be working with ancestry type stuff, which makes sense, right? Now you look at what you're
yeah.
doing, and you were really, and I'm assuming you didn't know that great aunt in this life,
I
or you
I
did?
knew her, but not very well. So I did, so I recognized her.
Okay.
So when she showed up, I knew exactly who it was. I
And when
knew
she showed up, were you sleeping during that moment? Were you in a dream?
Yes. So
Okay.
the visitations are when it is a different type of dream. And it is, but it's so unique, and people who have had visitations, and it's often loved ones who will come in. My dad came in once after he passed away. And his was not like this one where it was real communication, but I remember after he passed away, he was very ill and almost, just wilted away. I mean, there wasn't much left to him. And I had a dream that he came down the driveway across the street from where I had grown up with a sport coat over his shoulder as a young man.
Hmm.
And I knew he was sharing with me, that's who I am in heaven. I'm back to my old,
Wow.
back to
Yeah.
So, but Sister Lou's was, and she was very spiritual. She went into the story of her, because I know, as I've done all the ancestry, she wanted to go into the convent, and her parents didn't want her to go. And she had somebody whisk her away and take her, and they didn't, and because it was meant so much to her. And I know that that was for her a spiritual, I believe it was a higher spiritual calling, not
Mm.
just because this wasn't somebody said, oh, you should go be a nun. This was her saying, this was my calling. And so her story, so when she showed up, and after I woke up, I knew um, how strong it was spiritually, that I had this connection with her.
Yeah. And you said that you mentioned it felt like this. It felt like us even
Yeah,
having this moment.
absolutely.
So the experience itself felt real in nature, but from a non-physical place.
Right.
But did it look physical still? And it felt,
It,
did it feel like we were in a different realm?
it didn't feel like I was in a different realm. But yes, it did. So it was a gold room. So it was kind of, but what was really interesting, and what's still, and I'm looking, I'm doing this, holding my hands. Um, Across the veil, I felt her holding my hands. So that's what got me to look at her, because I didn't want to look at her. And she held my hands until I looked at her. And
Hmm.
that's when she said, we hear your prayers.
And why do
So
you think you didn't want to look at her?
I think in my subconscious that I realized was that this wasn't a dream. I think that there was something that was telling me, I feel like it was almost a crossing, that I was, um, that I went to her, um,
Hmm.
in some way. And that's, because it was when I say, I mean, it literally, she was as clear as looking at you. I mean, of course it was I was asleep, but it was very, very clear, and was only the two of us.
So it could have been your intuition that knew that this was a different type of experience. And
Hmm.
there could have been intuitive, I don't want to say intuitive fear, but because you're still grounded here, there was this
Right.
feeling of if I move into this energy, what does that exactly mean? How is this happening? There might have been some questioning there, but
Yeah.
then it seems like she then held you and made you feel comforting, like it's
Mhm.
okay, like this is not going to hurt you or harm you. This is
Yeah.
just an experience. That's kind of what I'm getting from the way you've explained it.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
just
that's,
want
it's so fascinating to hear somebody else interpret it, because I agree with you. I think that's true. Um, I think that's true.
yeah.
That's
So
a good
because you
way.
knew it would felt different than the actual typical dream, and you knew that it was something else. And obviously, as you came back, you had that knowingness, right? Because you came back,
Yes.
you felt it.
Yes.
And then the other question was because later on you started doing the rosary and you had this channeling. I've spoke with one other, I think it was maybe one or two other guests at most so far on this journey of the soul inspired that have done channeling, and it's that one area where I'm pretty out there, people that um, have heard the show, they see that it's not that I don't really sit and never just agree with everyone. I just have my own thoughts around everything and I like to have
Mhm.
a conversation. But the one area where I have struggled a little bit is the channeling side of things, especially because some people can really dig into that. And I do tend to like dig into it now and say, well, it could be out of my own ignorance of where we are currently. I mean, I look at we're in 2024. Yes, we're becoming more aware of
Mhm.
these energies and these things that are happening. Near-death experiences are more talked about. Spiritual
Yeah.
conversations are more talked about. But, you know, we're not like we're still growing and we're still adapting to who we really are. And
Mhm.
somehow the channeling part seems to get me in a way that I can't quite comprehend. I can't quite feel into it. And in fact, I think it could be because there's a little bit of a general fear around it to feel that I could be have someone channeling through me because
Yeah.
maybe it's because I want control all the time of this body.
Oh,
If this is my vehicle. And so like don't go there. That like I'm
yeah.
me.
I
Right?
love that, Joe.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that because part of all of this, because I've continued and I now have a guide that is with me
Okay.
and my constant companion. And it truly is, when this opening requires on some level surrender
Hmm.
and allow and understanding that this connection is that it's there. We were never, other cultures talk about the other side, or their children are raised to know that there are spiritual beings, but we weren't, I mean, saints and angels were over there, but not in it was like so far away that, you could put a statue and look at something, but that was it. That was the extent of really, the connection.
Hmm.
And as I think the first one with Sister Lou made me understand what was happening with the second one. I think that opened the door for me. Had the first had the channeling happened first, I don't know if I would have understood it, but it was like Sister Lou had come to me and said, "We hear your prayers." So I knew there were more of them. And I knew that it wasn't her because it was this Irish brogue that was,
Right.
so strong. And so yeah, when I help people to try and open this connection up,
Hmm.
and it is having to allow, um, allow some belief in when, when it's hard to imagine that that you can do this.
And I think when you said surrender, surrender is the big piece. And fear, I think there's fear. I think that it's much like, we want to allow good energy in, and we have to
Mm-hmm.
be very cautious of these things too. But I think that if you're doing things from a place of and then again, I don't even know what I'm talking about because I don't actually do channeling or anything, but I would assume that you need to really be grounded in a positive energy to to allow that to happen because I don't really know whether there's um less than good energies out there. I would think so. I mean, I look at the world we live in and energy is energy and there's
Energy
some
is, yeah,
positive
absolutely.
and there's some negative. And I think
Yeah,
that that's
absolutely.
why I would say to everybody, be cautious of what you're doing
Yeah,
and trust and you work through people that are like, I look at what you do and I think it seems like because you're now doing this,
yeah,
you've become more skilled in it because you've been doing it for a while and you're more used
yeah,
to how to, and this is why being able to come to someone like you
yeah.
is amazing, right? Because you've had life experience. And I just want to say one other thing is, you know, surrender, I believe, a lot of times comes in times where, look at what you were going through.
Mm-hmm.
You were losing your husband,
Mm-hmm.
and when those kind of things happen, the normal day-to-day life starts to drift
Yeah.
away and you want to
Mm-hmm.
start to know a little bit more of okay, what is actually going on here?
Yeah.
And once you surrender to that, then
Mm-hmm.
that's why I think not everyone's walking around and having a channeling session because so many people are busy in their day to day. Life is
Yeah,
depending on different
exactly.
stages of their life.
Yes.
So I think as we get further in our
Yes.
life and we have these moments, that's why you probably see people a little
Yeah.
later in life generally having these experiences. Not always, but
Yeah.
it does
Well,
happen. So
it's like, well, Patrice, I was just, hardly married, and just had really little ones, at the time when she passed away. And so I had life to do. So it was,
mhm.
I had this curiosity. I couldn't stop to take the time and explore this. And it's interesting. you just brought up that it made me think of this. After David passed away, it is really when it started to open up a lot. And I did go to people to learn more and found some spiritual guides that could help me understand this connection that we had. And I had been working in a middle school with these younger kids that had some grief and trauma, and I began to work in elder care management, and became certified as an end of life doula, so that I
Wow.
could, yeah, so that I can help those who were in transition, even if it wasn't imminent, that I had the knowledge of what crossing over looked like and what it feels like. And there's so much. I mean, that's what the IONS has done, all of
Mhm.
that information about what not only the experiencers, the people that have the near death experiences, but also the research they're doing on people crossing, and where their consciousness is when they're like on one side and the other, and how they can almost go back and forth. So that's what kind of that was like the second half of this spiritual journey for me, was not only opening up more myself, but then bringing in this, working with this elder population,
Mhm.
and being able to talk to them about them and their families about what it means to cross and what it might look like.
And I think that's so important because those are usually during a lot of people have, I would assume, would have a lot of stress around that time, and there's within the family, within themselves, trying to look at their whole life. So doing that kind of work is amazing, and I love that. I mean, I have had many guests who've had NDEs who get into that work later on too, because they have. It's not that I don't want to say they have no fear of death, because some of them are still wanting to stick around and all that, but the idea of what's next, they already have come to the conclusion of that in their own experiences. So to be able to bring that to people who are getting near, which is something we all do, and I know sometimes it can be a morbid topic, but it's
Yeah.
part of life. It's part of this whole experience, right? This
Well,
this growing.
and I want people to talk about it more. I want people to talk spirituality more and talk about, because it really is a circle. So when I'm helping people dig into their ancestry and understand the experiences that they went through and what may have been passed down to them, and one of the reasons I'm wanting to do it is because they've passed, and this is a circle that we keep, we go through life, and then we're the ancestors on the other side. And then,
Hmm.
I mean, it's kind of,
Mm.
so I love talking about crossing over and talking about death is needs to be something that's really I would love it if it was talked about more, and so that there's joy or laughter. I had this great, oh my gosh, she was hilarious, little 88-year-old woman, and she was like 4 foot nothing. And we were having this conversation. I was joking with her and I said, well, Ellen, when you get to heaven, she goes, oh, I'm not going to heaven. I said, you're not going to? She said, no, I'm going to be cremated.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Okay.
she didn't understand about heaven. And so we
Mhm.
ended up in this beautiful conversation where she said nobody ever talked to her about it. And
Wow.
he was an only child, had led kind of an isolated life. And so I opened this up. And then a couple of weeks later, she said to me, I think I know what heaven's like. Like she said, I've flown, I've been in an airplane. And so
Mhm.
she said, I think I know what heaven looks like,
Mm.
was what her, and so it was, I loved those conversations, and I would have them as well with people.
And it's amazing that there are people who go through their life where that thought really doesn't cross them until the end.
Mhm.
And then there's people like me when I'm 16 and I'm contemplating everything, looking at my hand and
Yes.
wondering what is the purpose and thinking, why? But I do believe we all come here with different soul blueprints or something. There's
Yes.
something, and I
Yeah.
just was always more aware since childhood. And it, that's just kind of the where my feelings always were. You,
Yeah.
I, you know, I wanted to just ask this because I just wanted you to dig in a little bit more about what you do, because you're saying that you work with people's ancestries, and I love that. I love the idea of this full circle. And I do also, I just want to add, I do believe that the idea of death and where we're going next and all these things, I would hope that years and years from now, humankind, like, we'll be at a place where we celebrate it. And
Yeah.
because the odd thing is there are ancient civilizations and ancient people that did celebrate these things. And somewhere along the lines of modern world science, and this something shifted somewhere. I don't know what
Oh,
year it was or when it
yeah.
kind of went a little awry, but something changed and it turned into fear-based around the whole
Yeah.
life cycle. Whereas at the end, as we get near the end, there's more of a fear. And in fact, if you look at the elderly, a lot of them are treated poorly, whereas they should be treated like royalty, really. Like, they've gone through the life experience and they're about to experience this big awakening or this big shift.
Yeah.
We don't look at things like that. And I am, I have high hopes that, and I'm probably way ahead of myself in where we're at in this world right now, but I would like to see, it
Yeah.
would be beautiful to see myself, if not in this life, just to know the future history of us to get to that point. I just
Yeah,
wanted to add
and
that.
I think I believe it's happening. What we don't know, time, it's happening soon. Soon is that word that has, when is soon,
Hmm.
So, I believe that what you are doing, what I'm now trying to do with the podcast that I've just been co-hosting is like to raise the level, bring it up to do that so that, um, yeah, and I agree with you. You have a very spiritual, I can feel that spirituality around you. And I want you to think about, which is just that I feel like there's an opening, more of an opening that's waiting for you, and it is waiting for you. It's there. They're all there. It's waiting because there is that little bit, you already alluded to it, that little bit of fear of, I need to make sure that this is going to be a good thing before I, you know. And so what happens is sometimes when you get thrown into it, you're like, oh, it's like you get thrown into the water and you find out that was the best thing. I'm so glad that it was such a refreshing way,
Hmm.
somebody tosses you in. So,
Yeah, I think one area that I've always questioned, and I appreciate you saying that. I think I look at it, and I talk to so many amazing people, and so many people who have had these awakenings and things. And one of the questions I sometimes ask them is, I look at the world we have, and I go, do you ever, now knowing or feeling of knowing of what you know, do you ever look around at the way a large majority of us are? um, and question, do we, for the people who aren't maybe seeing things in the same
yeah,
light, do you ever question what on earth is going on? Or is it more of a sense of it's all right? Everything is always in the right place at the right time. Everything is meant to be that way. Because I think some of the fear that I have is, well, yes, I love my spirituality, but I also love sitting down and watching the football game on Sunday.
yeah, yeah,
I also love having this life experience. I have a 2-year old. I have two other kids. I have life that I'm experiencing. And so I think some of the fear comes around is I don't want to change who I am. And there's
yeah,
probably people who watch this show who are really dabbling into their own spirituality or their own belief systems and have these fears. And it could be unconscious fears.
yeah.
And I don't know if you can speak on that or what you feel
Oh,
about that.
but you're talking, it's exactly what it was for me back when my kids were little. And it was that I had this curiosity. You've done more with it. But there wasn't time, and two, I didn't know how to fit it in. I didn't know how to allow myself to take that journey, and what would that journey look like, and how would that affect the relationship, my close and my little nuclear family at the time. What
Mm,
would that, how would that affect it? So it is, um, and so that's why, as you were saying, sometimes it's when it's presented to you, like somebody who has had an NDE, it's presented to them. It's just their bodies, they separated, and uh, and then for people as they're older and they do have more time to do to research and look into spirituality. And yeah, it's interesting because you asked me about what I do, and one of the things that I do, the way it all happened is that I realized as I was doing ancestry for people, I was at this point I was beginning to the ancestors come in, and I know I know which branch of the tree to be looking at, or the ancestors will give me affirmations, or tell me about. So the people that I'm building a tree for, they get a deeper sense of who they are, and they hear the stories. I've always been a storyteller. I come from storytellers, and so telling the story is what's so important, and helping people see the experiences and what may have been passed down. And so they end up seeing a little bit of each of those parts of them that they saw in the tree in themselves here. And those experiences mix with our spiritual energy that comes in, so that we do have these let's say patterns of behaviors that get passed down, or incredible resilience and strength that gets passed down. And those things are coming from physical experiences that people have had that we can look at, and sometimes that's an easier opening on a spiritual journey for somebody who may be a little afraid to take the spiritual journey, that it's easier to take the journey of connecting with their ancestors.
Yeah.
And then what happens is they start to really connect with they start to feel their ancestors' energy, like I felt Patrice's energy. And so
Mm.
we start to work with what they're feeling and how they can begin to foster the connection on the other side, and to start.
Wow. I
Yeah. So
love that. I've never, and again, you're the first I've spoke with who I've spoke with many mediums and people who do work with clients and things like that, and they're seeing loved ones that have passed. Yours is a little different because it's around the ancestry and it's around that the heritage of who they were or the who came before them
yeah,
type thing. And you're right. I think for many people who want to get closer to their spirituality, but at the same time want comfort to feel still safe in
yeah,
this
like their feet are still on the
in this
ground.
bot yeah, because we've come here in this embodiment of who we are,
Yeah.
and not everybody wants to float around. It's like
Yeah.
so it's this idea of the way that you're doing it, it's more of a comforting feeling where they're kind of people are holding your hand to kind of show you a little bit of who you are. And I'm assuming that you've probably had clients then that you've worked with where when you bring up these ancestors, it's a dead ringer. Like it really hits them and they think, wow, that's exactly who I am,
Yeah.
exactly the things that
Yeah.
I'm working through.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's your way of accessing their behaviors and the things. Wow, that's really
Yeah.
interesting. And again, a lot of the audience may be listening and thinking, Joe, come on, you didn't know that? I wasn't aware of the ancestry
Yeah.
thing. I think that's what I was so fascinated about when I had heard from you, and I thought it'd be amazing to have you on because you're working with people in this place. It's a
Yeah.
different
It is,
environment.
and it helps them with grief. It helps them with what's been going on in their life. It helps them to go into themselves, because truly that's what we're trying to do, is make that connection, that this spirit person, this our spirit, connect with our spiritual selves inside our human body. And because we are here, we're supposed to be here. And I have this connection with my spirit guide, and there are days when I'm having a bad day and I'm like, you sure I can't come home? You sure I can't? And they're like, nope. you know
Not
so
time.
we're we're supposed to be here, and
Hmm.
we're supposed to be experiencing all that we're going through, because it is all of these experiences are people talk about ascension, and ascension means for what ascension means for me is eventually that we're all seeking source, that we're reaching for source, whatever that means to somebody, and that we're just, the more that we're learning and the more that we're opening spiritually, that we're just raising up, a little bit at a time.
Hmm.
And but we have to come back down because you got to put the baby to bed, or you
Yeah,
have to watch where the football game is on,
that's right.
or but then we can go back up. And so it is learning the dance, and that's what I try and teach. And
Wow.
once you start to learn the language, you want to know that you want to know more. And
Yeah.
that's, I try and guide them onto ways, because they don't, we're all given this gift. Like the gift of being able to connect with spirit wasn't just given to me. So they've actually asked me, like, to be a teacher, to help people know that there are ways they can open up, and that they already have, they just don't realize it.
Hmm.
So
Wow. That's all amazing. Do you have like a website or anything? How do people
I
connect with
do. My
you?
website is tellmeourstory.com. And it's from the point of view of the child asking the parent to tell me our story. And and you can find me on Instagram, you can find me on Facebook. Um, I spoke at IONS this past in August at their conference.
Oh,
I
wow.
Yeah, I was on a panel with one was an ND, or one was somebody who read angels, and I brought the ancestry and the understanding, the spiritual connection. So I'm on, but I'm on, so all of those, Facebook, Instagram, but my website has the most information,
And
and
that's
it
Yeah, and you said that's tellmeourstory.com. Is that the same? Would that be when people are looking for social media, that's the same thing? Tell me your story would be
yeah,
the
it's
name of
tell
the
me
social media.
our story.
Tell me our story. Okay.
So that's where, and if I could rename it, if I could go back, I probably would, because it gets confused and people are like, but so it's tell me our story. Like, think about you asking somebody, asking your parents or asking a grandparent, tell me our story. Like, well, who are we?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still like the name. It's just, yeah, it just takes a minute to get. But is that also the name of, because you mentioned you have a podcast you're doing. Because
So
it
the
was what?
podcast is now linked to yes, I am now the co-host of How I Made It Through with Kristen Taylor. And that is also, it's on YouTube, it's on Instagram, we're on Facebook. And so but you can link to it through Tell Me Our Story.
Okay,
Oh,
perfect. So I always, if anyone's watched any of the previous shows, I love just getting the information because we're all doing a different thing here. And each time I speak with someone, I always say, like, I get a little bit of a piece of what they're doing in their life spiritually, and
yeah.
then I go, okay, I guess that's where everyone's at. And then I get someone else and it's a little bit different. It's a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit different. Like, wow, there's really a lot of people out here to really trying to,
yeah,
I guess to use the word awaken, but it's not in a forceful way. It's not
yeah,
pushing or anything. It's
no,
just to, hey,
yeah.
this is what's available for you if you need, if you
Yeah.
want, if you're
Well,
interested, right?
and it's funny because sometimes I have people that just they've heard that I know how to, that they can be taught. So that's all
Hmm.
that, it's like,
Yeah.
teach me. And then others that want to go through that whole experience and really feel um, the energy. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Wow. Well, it's all amazing. I've loved talking to you. One of the questions I end each episode with is to really just, I always want to know everyone's outlook on maybe who we are, why we're here, I guess the general purpose of why we come here. If you have any, do you have any insight on that? Have you ever gotten that from
Yeah,
any work?
I mentioned that I have a guide, and they came early in 2020, like 2021. And they have been teaching me, truly teaching me, and the what 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 I was talking about, the oh, the opening our consciousness and raising our consciousness is a big part of why we are here. And because, ultimately, you were talking about how we have all, there definitely is negative, there are a lot of heavy souls down here. And it's ultimately what spirit wants is for all of us to raise up. And so that's so, but we're doing it on an individual level, focusing on ourselves, but bringing anybody along that we can is kind of the way they explained it to me. So my journey was my own because of the awakening that I had and the way I awakened. And so when they came to me and we started working together, it is like building off of that. And the work that I had been doing grew, in terms of the spiritual growth and, working with the ancestral healing. So spirit comes in, they're already working with you. Like, that even though it's hard for you there, because this work that you are doing is part of that. So we all get that little piece that belongs to us that helps other people on their journey, is kind of as we are on ours.
Wow. I love that. So we're kind of within awakening ourselves
Right,
and helping others along the way so that they can
right,
do the same thing in
right,
hopes that they can do the same thing. If,
right,
so yeah, no, I love that. And so that's what you see as the general reason as to why we're here and the things that we're
right.
doing.
And
And
and I've asked those questions of spirit, like the world's kind of, a mess, or it feels like it's a
it can be
mess.
at times for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're aware.
Hmm.
They know what's going on.
Hmm.
They understand. There's they aren't far away.
Right.
And they are, there's spirit around every soul that's here.
Hmm.
So it's more of but yeah, you're definitely on your journey, and you know that.
I'm feeling it more and more. I'll say it like that. And I've also it's something that I've always put out there too, is as much as because as much as this world has its downwards, there's so many ups too. And I'm always
Yeah.
been a positive.
Yeah, me too. At glass half full.
Yeah, like I always say, well, don't forget about that experience. Don't forget
Yeah.
about what it was like to have that child or that first dance or that for like there's moments in life that are beautiful and we have to be aware of that too.
Yeah.
The dark sides are there, but the hope is that we get out of those, and that's kind of what we're doing. But
And I always say, surround yourself with white light, with you have, angels and guides and spirit, that if you do have any fears, you just call them in. You
mm,
just, if you're feeling, and as the more you open, you're affected by energy. And that. Like, you can feel energy, when you've gone into a room and there's not such good. And that's where you start to use them and say, okay, I'm a little uncomfortable. Can you just let me know that you've kind of put a little cone around me, put a little light around,
mhm.
whatever, a little. So yeah,
Yeah, well, I love that. And I appreciate you so much coming on the show today. This
I
has been an
know.
amazing conversation. I would suggest to anybody who's interested in anything that we've talked about today to definitely check out Bernadette's website. Again, it was tellmeourstory.com.
Yeah,
And I also go to the audience and say, please continue to like, share, and subscribe to the Soul Inspired. This is the reason why I and we are doing this is to continue to just allow others to kind of learn and grow through the experiences of other people. So it's been amazing talking to you. Thank you so much for being on today.
thanks, Joe.
So